The night she called me, her voice didn't sound human. It sounded hollow, like something inside her had been scooped out and left echoing. I could hear traffic behind her, the wind, and the faint tremble she was trying to hide. She said she was sitting on the curb outside her apartment building. The locks had already been changed. Her bags were lined up beside her like unwanted luggage at an airport that had already closed for the night. And in that moment, without thinking, without calculating rent or space or consequences, I said the words that would change both of our lives. "You can stay with me." There was a pause on the other end. A long one. Then a broken laugh. She thought I was joking. Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and showing up for the people who once showed up for you, take a second to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the smallest decisions can become the biggest turning points. Her name was Ariba. She had been my best friend since we were 15. When we were both awkward girls hiding in the school library during lunch because the cafeteria felt too loud and too unforgiving. We used to dream about leaving our small town, about apartments with string lights and careers that made our parents proud. She was the brave one back then. The one who auditioned for plays. The one who applied for internships in cities we had only seen on Instagram. I was the cautious one. The planner. The safe choice maker. Life, however, doesn't respect personality types. By 28, I was living alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of an old building with peeling paint and a stubborn elevator that rarely worked. I worked remotely for a marketing firm, long hours that blurred into evenings. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Ariba, on the other hand, had moved to the city years before me. She chased opportunities, dated men who promised stability, signed leases she believed she could afford once things picked up. For a while, it looked like she had made it. She posted photos of rooftop dinners and office parties, smiling in dresses I couldn't imagine myself wearing. But the posts slowed down. Then they stopped. That night, as she sat on the curb with her entire life packed into 2 suitcases and a duffel bag, she told me the truth. The startup she worked for had collapsed without warning. Her savings evaporated into rent and bills. The boyfriend she thought she might marry had quietly moved his things out 2 weeks earlier, leaving behind a polite text and half a bottle of shampoo. She had tried to hold it together, applying for jobs, negotiating with her landlord, pretending she wasn't unraveling. But when the eviction notice turned into a changed lock, her pride shattered. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my car keys. When I pulled up to her building, she looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically smaller, but folded in on herself. The confident girl from the library was gone. Her eyes were red, her mascara smudged, her hair tied back in a loose knot that seemed to be holding on as loosely as she was. For a second, I saw embarrassment flash across her face. She wasn't used to being the one who needed rescuing. The drive back to my place was quiet. The city lights passed over her face in slow intervals, illuminating the exhaustion she couldn't hide. When we reached my apartment, I carried one of her suitcases while she followed behind, apologizing with every step. She kept saying it would only be for a few days. She kept promising she would figure something out. I told her to stop apologizing. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't afraid. My apartment was small. The living room barely fit a couch and a narrow coffee table. My bedroom was my only real sanctuary. The thought of sharing my space, my routine, my silence, made my chest tighten. I had worked hard for this stability. For this independence. I liked knowing exactly how my days would unfold. Letting someone else into that rhythm felt like inviting chaos. Still, I laid out clean sheets on the couch and gave her my spare blanket. I made tea the way we used to in high school, too sweet and too hot. That night, she fell asleep almost instantly. I didn't. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sound of another person breathing in my living room. I wondered if I had just made a mistake that would cost me more than money. The first week was awkward. She tried to make herself invisible. She woke up early, folded her blanket with military precision, and spent hours scrolling through job listings on her laptop. I could feel her shame hanging in the air, thick and heavy. She insisted on cleaning the kitchen, doing the dishes, wiping down counters that were already clean. I could tell she was trying to earn her stay. But tension crept in quietly. My grocery bills doubled. My internet slowed under the weight of two people applying for jobs and streaming interviews. I caught myself resenting the extra noise, the way the bathroom was never fully mine anymore. I hated myself for those thoughts, but they were there. Then one evening, I came home from running errands and found her sitting on the floor of my bedroom, holding one of my old photo albums. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. She had been looking at pictures of us at 16, laughing with braces and messy hair, holding homemade cupcakes at my birthday party. She said she didn't recognize that girl anymore. She said somewhere along the way, she had confused independence with isolation. That was the first time she admitted how lonely she had been. Not just broke, not just unemployed, lonely. Over the next few weeks, something shifted between us. Instead of pretending everything was fine, we started talking honestly. About fear, about failure, about the pressure to look successful online while falling apart in private. She told me how she had stayed in that relationship far longer than she should have because she didn't want to admit she had chosen wrong. I admitted that sometimes I envied her risk-taking, even as it backfired. We began to cook dinner together in my tiny kitchen, bumping into each other and laughing when we burned the onions. We created a schedule for bathroom time. We set boundaries about work hours and quiet hours. Slowly, my apartment stopped feeling cramped and started feeling alive. But just as things began to feel stable, another storm hit. My company announced restructuring. Layoffs were coming. The email arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. Suddenly, I was the one refreshing my inbox every few minutes, waiting to see if my name would appear on the list. The irony wasn't lost on me. The fear I had watched in Ariba's eyes weeks earlier was now mirrored in my own. When I told her, I expected panic. Instead, she surprised me. She sat beside me on the couch and calmly opened a spreadsheet. She asked about my savings, my monthly expenses. She helped me calculate how long I could manage if the worst happened. She started researching freelance opportunities for both of us. For the first time since she moved in, she wasn't the one being carried. She was carrying me. The layoff email eventually came. My name was on it. I won't pretend I handled it gracefully. I cried. I questioned my worth. I stared at the walls of my apartment and wondered if I was about to lose the very stability I had been so protective of. But Ariba didn't let me spiral alone. She reminded me of every late night I had spent perfecting presentations. Every campaign I had successfully led. She told me this wasn't the end of my story. The next few months were some of the hardest of my life. We both searched for work relentlessly. Rejections piled up. Savings shrank. There were nights when we ate instant noodles and pretended they were a gourmet choice. But there was also laughter. There were evenings when we sat on the balcony with cheap tea, watching the city lights and talking about who we wanted to become, not who we had been. Then one afternoon, she got an email. A marketing agency had seen one of her freelance projects and wanted to interview her. The interview turned into a second one. The second turned into an offer. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I remember the way she held the offer letter in her hands, trembling the same way she had on that curb weeks earlier. Only this time, her trembling was mixed with hope. 2 weeks later, I received a contract offer for a remote consulting project. Temporary, but promising. We celebrated with store-brand ice cream and music playing from my phone. As her first paycheck came in, she insisted on contributing to rent. She paid for groceries. She replaced my aging coffee maker with a new one, even though I protested. But more than the financial help, she brought something else back into my life. Purpose. Living with her had forced me to confront my own isolation. I had built walls around my independence so thick that I had forgotten what it felt like to lean on someone. To share burdens. To admit fear without shame. By opening my door to her, I had unknowingly opened it to a fuller version of myself. Months passed. She eventually saved enough to look for her own place again. The day she told me she had signed a new lease, my heart did something complicated. I was proud, relieved, and strangely sad. On her last night in my apartment, we sat on the floor surrounded by takeout containers, just like we had done as teenagers with cheap pizza after exams. She thanked me for not laughing when she was at her lowest. For not letting her sleep in her car. For believing in her when she didn't believe in herself. But the truth was, she had saved me too. If this story has touched your heart so far, take a moment to engage with the video. Like it, share it, subscribe if you haven't already. You never know who might need to hear that asking for help is not weakness, and offering help is not foolishness. And before we reach the end, I have one special request for you. Comment the word, home, below if you believe home isn't just a place, but the people who stand beside you when everything else falls apart. The morning she moved out, the apartment felt too quiet. I stood in the doorway as she loaded her last suitcase into a rideshare. She hugged me tightly, the kind of hug that says more than words ever could. There were no dramatic speeches. Just gratitude. Just understanding. When the car pulled away, I walked back upstairs to my third-floor apartment. The elevator was still broken. The paint was still peeling. But something inside me had changed. I no longer saw my space as a fragile bubble that needed protecting at all costs. I saw it as a shelter that had done its job. A small, imperfect place that had held two women through loss, fear, and rebuilding. "You can stay with me," I had said on impulse. She thought I was joking. But sometimes the simplest sentences carry the greatest power. Sometimes opening your door doesn't just change someone else's life. It changes your own. And if there's one thing I learned from that night on the curb, it's this: kindness is rarely convenient. It will stretch you. It will test your patience. It will make you confront parts of yourself you didn't know were there. But it will also build bridges where pride once stood. Years from now, when I think about the hardest season of my life, I won't remember the eviction notice or the layoff email as clearly as I'll remember the sound of shared laughter in a cramped kitchen. I won't remember the fear as much as I'll remember the resilience. Because in the end, home wasn't my apartment, it was us.